Diplomacy leagues are back. New game version on track. And broadcasters talk some smack. I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and this is Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Dateline, March 2023. For our feature story, shortly after the game itself was released in 1959, the diplomacy hobby formed largely around the play of the game by mail. In order to facilitate this play, as well as to publicize face-to-face tournaments and events, the hobby's forebears created fan magazines called Zines, which were published as labors of love by hobbyists all around the world. Those zines became not only the backbone for organized play of the game, but also the connective tissue, allowing for the growth of a vibrant hobby of diplomacy fans. They focused not just on the games, but also talked about strategy and tactics, about variants, personalities, politics, movies, anything else that people of shared interests talk about. This zine scene persisted as the primary method of hobby interaction until the late 1990s when the internet changed everything forever. However, zines are not extinct. Later in the broadcast, we'll talk to a longtime zine publisher who is still in operation after 3 decades about how and why his zine is still hosting games for happy hobbyists. But first, a look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. The 2023 Virtual Diplomacy League season began with a bang. It had a full slate of games played on March 11th. We saw a dominating Russian board top from Jackson Roberts, a well-timed one-center edge from Austria with Jaromir Sulja in charge, an English stab by Peter McNamara of his German ally for the top on his board, Wes Ketchum's winning race for the board top as Italy with his Austrian ally Karthik Konev. We also saw a number of strong alliance games with shared results and a bunch of fun and kooky moves from newer and veteran players alike. For more information about the league, visit the VDL section of our Diplomacy Broadcast Network website at diplabn.com, the link for which is below. There is also a VDL section on the VWDC Discord server through which the games are actually played, and there's a link to that server also below. The next set of VDL games will be played on April 29th, with games friendly to diplomacy players in any time zone worldwide. And if you didn't catch the DBN broadcast of those March 11th games coverage, that link is also below. While we are on the subject of diplomacy played in the virtual face-to-face format, the 2023 season of the Tour of Britain is also right around the corner. Organizer Gary Sturley has announced that the first game day of the tour will be 4 p.m. UK time on Saturday, the 18th of March. That's 5 p.m. for Western Europe, 11 a.m. New York, 10 a.m. Chicago, 8 a.m. Pacific Coast, and 3 a.m. for all those fine folks in Sydney, Australia. Will His Royal Highness Tim Crosby defend his crown, or will you be the one to send him into exile and set yourself up as the new British monarch? Will some daring soul go full Cromwell on this thing, abolish the monarchy, and declare themselves Lord Protector? Who knows? A brief reminder of the format. The season consists of 8 total games through the year, of which you can play as many as you wish, but your best 4 scores count. Any and all players are welcome, regardless of skill level or experience. For more information about the rules and schedule, visit the website link provided below. I am pleased to report that Robert Schuppe's German language virtual games are up and running, organized on the VWDC Discord server as well. The 4th of a series of games played auf Deutsch was just completed on March 6th. In that one, the Austrian player, who was in an AT alliance with Robert Schuppe's Turkey, topped the board at 9 centers. If you want to join in this Germanic fun, join the VWDC Discord server using that link below, and then select the role for German language play and Fröhliches Spielen. While you're on that server, and if your language skills are more pedestrian, in other words, just English, then join in the house games section of the VWDC, where they organize casual games of live virtual diplomacy for both diplomacy veterans and newcomers alike. Stay tuned for an interview with House Games organizer Ben Kellman coming right up after these headlines. The third season of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network Invitational Tournament concluded with a rousing top board on February 25th. In a game played all the way to fall 1916, Brandon Fogel of Illinois barely edged out his competition with his 9-center Italy. He became the newest diplomat of the year. Let's talk now to the champ himself about that victory, about an upcoming face-to-face tournament, and about an upcoming special DBN grudge match. Brandon Fogel, you are just off of your victory in the DBN Invitational. Did you go to Disney World? What did you do right after it was over?
I slept as much as I could, which wasn't a whole lot that night, but the next night I caught up a good 10 hours straight.
Well, you were probably kind of hyped up from winning the whole bloody thing.
You know, I don't sleep well after diplomacy, whether I do well or not. The mind is just so activated. It is worse if I don't do well, especially if I make some really boneheaded mistakes that end up costing me. Then then there's the cycle of shame and self-flagellation. But even when I do well, I'm still just excited, hyped up.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Now, I know you've already explained, your take on the game in an article you wrote for Diplomacy Briefing. But now that you've had, more time, a few more days, a week or so to think about it some more, any other thoughts about the game that you didn't put in your Diplomacy Briefing piece?
Yeah, I think the thing that I kind of wish that I had spent some time on, the piece was long enough as it was, and I sort of focused on what some of the crucial decisions were like from my point of view, especially later in the game. But the thing that I kind of wish I had talked more about was just the sort of feel of the whole board and the way that we were all sort of playing off of each other, and it felt honestly kind of like a big harmony. There was a little we were all kind of making music of our own and together, and it all kind of worked together into a little symphony. Riaz and I were very scrupulously sending units to sort of just slow down the other one a little bit. I think the Eastern powers were annoyed that I wasn't sending more units west, but I was actually doing things that were affecting the West. It just wasn't in a way that would expose me to the Eastern powers the way that they probably wanted. Peter was, so conscious about how the board was working. Was keeping an eye on every single other player, and he made a move that I think he hoped we wouldn't be able to respond to, but we did. And even after that, he still stayed in contention and was right there at the very end. Nicolas was in a tough spot, I think, because he had I think a short window where he could have thrown the game into chaos in a way that would have opened up a bigger path for him, and he missed that. But he was still sort of viewing the overall web of the game and sort of plucking strings. And Chris, had his hands like all over the entire board. I think he was the one who was most like on the bicycle, like flying through the Alps during the Tour de France, just like sticking things here, pulling things there. Ruben played as well as he possibly could have. I think he had the hardest task of anybody on the board, and I think he had a very narrow window early in the game where he could have sort of created a bigger path for him to stick around. And unfortunately, he missed it, I think, and just didn't get another chance. The rest of us had multiple chances to make mistakes and come back from them, and Ruben just didn't. So
I wonder if Ruben had retreated to somewhere other than Naples when he had that forward position, if that really would have changed his game a lot.
I think so. If he retreats to Greece, for example, and gets a build off of that, I'm very open to working with him at that point. And it's a totally different game if that happens, right? Because then it's just harder for Italy with a big Turkey to really grow quickly or achieve fleet dominance, which is something I was focused on. So I think he needed to do something like that. But after that. After Nicola turned back on him, I mean, that was it. He just there was no game for him left because the three of us were then committed to taking him out in order to respond to the West. And Noam came in with a specific plan. I think it was a learning experience for him. that a tactical plan isn't enough, especially on a board like that. And so I'm sure he'll learn from that and come back stronger. But yeah, I think I just want to compliment everyone on the board, and sort of congratulate all of us for creating this little symphony that I think was like diplomacy music at its best. And
yeah, I tend to agree with you. But let's talk about how we created the situation that allowed that game to occur, which is the entire DBN Invitational structure itself. Tell me how you, as one of the people who was helping to organize this thing, how do you think this particular third annual event went?
I think it was a smashing success. I think that, and I've got mostly positive feedback from people who were part of it and people who were watching. We'll do an exit survey and get some, more sort of systematic feedback from people. But we changed the structure significantly from the previous two. The previous two were similar in that everyone played 2 games and there was a scoring system involved, and we just tallied up the 2. And there was definitely awkwardness with it because if somebody soloed their first game, they still had to play a second game, and their incentives were awkward. And then there were people last year who played what seemed like a very safe strategy of a split board top and a second place, and that created situations where somebody, Wes Ketchum, I think, experienced this, where he had a very strong game going and then ran into this buzzsaw, which was a player on the other side of the board who had a player happy to take second place, so we, they just ground him out basically. And that showed us that what we really wanted to do was to force everyone to have to go for it every single game. And so we came up with this winner take all strategy for each game, and put it into place. We got some pushback from people who, were unhappy. They thought maybe the top seeds got too much advantage, which is still an open question. The higher seeds did better than I expected them to do. Top seeds in Paris method typically have not done very well. And this time, 3 of the 7 games were won by number 1 seeds. Those also happen to be the top 3 seeds in the tournament. So, open question there about whether it was the seed or the player that mattered. But that's stuff that we'll discuss. But on the whole, we ended up with 7 semifinal games that were all interesting and different in their own ways. But all
they were different for sure. Yeah, they were not. There was not a cookie cutter at all.
Yeah, not at all. Which is fascinating too, right? Like there are multiple ways to go about winning a winner take all board, but they all had like this essential element of drama that we want as putting out this television product, but also as players and viewers. Like the essence of diplomacy for me is that tension between going for it and playing it safe. And in the end, there was no play it safe strategy that could take you to the top. It could get you into contention to win a board, but ultimately you had to take a big risk at some point. And that was just great drama. And the players enjoyed it more, from what I can tell.
I think that from what I've heard, I think that's right. I think it was a more enjoyable experience for them, and I think it was an enjoyable experience for us watching it and commentating on the games. I was particularly struck this year by not just the participation by members of the French language hobby, but actually the success.
Yeah, that was cool. There were a couple boards where there were a bunch of French players on it, so they were able to speak French with each other, and you might have thought that would make them more comfortable and increase their odds of success, but one of those boards ended up in a solo for a Canadian player, Riaz Varani. So I think that might actually have worked against them that game. It was the East, which had a lot of French players, was sort of a cauldron of vipers and backstabbing. But Ruben is the guy who ended up making the top board, and he's just an excellent player, really quality player. And I don't know if having other French players made it more comfortable for him or not. But he's been on top boards, at lots of tournaments. So.
Oh yeah. And, Nicolas, was in the tournament largely because he had won the French language league. So you had Nicolas Sauguet winning the French language league. You had Ruben there who had won the French version of the Virtual Diplomacy Championship. I mean, it was quality play from quality players from the French language hobby that made it to the finals. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, one of our goals at DBN is to make this a truly global effort, and Europe is sort of the next most active region after North America, It's been great to see them take an interest in DBN and care about the invitational, care about making it, and it was really great to see Ruben make the top board.
Speaking of Europeans, Robert Schupa had to miss the top board, but there's another European that made the field. That's actually how Nikolai got into the top board. But, another example of how we had some great diversity in this year's field.
Yeah, Robert's committed to growing the German-speaking hobby. So I know he's got some German language games going periodically on the VWDC server. For the third year in a row, the top board has had participants from all three major time zone groups. So North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. And that's a bit of a surprise, to be honest. I think, we expected that we might once in a while have a scheduling difficulty because of that, but it's happened every year. So hopefully we'll get to see more tournaments qualifying for DBNI standings points from Asia Pacific. That's, they're having some tournaments, but they're not reaching the numbers.
Right.
And hopefully that'll change this year. Obviously it will with the World Championships happening in Bangkok.
One would certainly hope so. And frankly, the Australian hobby used to be bigger than it is now. It used to have several tournaments a year. I'm hoping it's something that can be resurrected as well. Well, speaking of tournaments that will give you DBNI points, one of the reasons you were in the field of the DBN Invitational was that you had won DixieCon 2022. We've got another DixieCon coming up here in a couple of months, and this year it is DibCon, the North American Championships. Tell the viewers a little bit about your experience playing at DixieCon and how you won it.
Wow. So yeah, DixieCon, that was my first time going to Dixie. I'd heard lots and lots about it. It's the venerable grandpa of tournaments in the diplomacy hobby, at least in North America. It's going for 38 years now. And it's a lovely event. It's different, I think, from other events for a couple of reasons. One is that lots of people are there not to play diplomacy. There are people who've been coming to the tournament for decades to play other games. They might get roped into playing a diplomacy game, but there are a lot of people who go to that tournament who don't go to any other tournament. So that's interesting. You get to meet a different swath of people. We've got the Southern Charm too, which people are friendly, and I think that takes after the guy who runs the tournament, Mr. David Hood. The other thing that's unique about it is the scoring system. It's got a significant draw base component, which is unusual. That's a bit out of fashion in terms of scoring. So it's a little bit like the clay of Roland Garros. It's a different surface and a slower one that sort of harkens back to an older time when tennis was not quite as athletic. And I kind of feel like Dixie scoring is a little bit like that.
So you're calling me unathletic is what I'm hearing.
I'm not saying it out loud.
Oh, I think it was out loud, actually.
You're not directed at you specifically.
Oh, fair enough. Well, what would you say to people who are thinking about going to DixieCon/DibCon this year and are not familiar with the scoring system? What would you say about that?
So Dixie is it's not 100% draw based, but that is the most important component. And what that means is that tempo is not as important as having a plan for the whole game. So you should be formulating an end game plan pretty much from the beginning. And every turn, every time you make any sort of alliance decision, you should be thinking about an end game structure for the alliance. So whether it's a 3-way draw, a 4-way draw, which is not great, 3-way should be your primary, but if you can get that 2-way, then that's what you want to be looking for. But what's more important than the number of centers is the number of people in the draw, and that should be your main focus. Centers matter. I think I won by a single center over Brian Ecton. So you do have to pay attention to that. But if you're not getting a 2 or 3-way draw every round, then you're not doing it right.
Brian Ecton, who won, I think, the 2005 version of DixieCon. He's one of those guys that's been coming for decades. Some of those people that come that don't play really anywhere else do come to play diplomacy. Some of them don't, but some of them do. There's some people who come and really are trying to win, and you can't really find them anywhere else. It is an interesting experience, I think, for that reason.
And if you're nice to David Hood, he will pull out a game that no one's played in 30 years and play it with you. And you'll enjoy it while also recognizing that there's a reason why this game doesn't get played much anymore. But
Wow.
You'll have a good time doing it.
Yeah, there we go. You recovered there towards the end, I would say.
That's it. Can't be too nice to David Hood, or else I have to go see the doctor.
That's fair. Well, I wanted to, first of all, congratulate you again for really an outstanding victory in the DBNI. It was fun to watch. It was exciting to the end, but you actually did have a plan for several game years before that end. I mean, and we certainly could tell at the end, and I think that was part of your success, is that it was not just a reactive situation. You had an actual plan that you put into practice.
I did, and it had a bunch of pieces to it. I wanted to get naval supremacy, so I forced my ally to let me disband his fleet, and then I had a specific plan for getting the Russian fleet off the board, and that involved reacting to something that was happening. Peter had stabbed him, and then I had to time the move just right, and it was by the what's the hair on my chinny chin chin? I don't know, the skin of my teeth.
Skin of your teeth.
Thank you. But yeah, it's and there was some bold tactical moves at the very end, a convoy that is going to be a happy memory for a long time. But yeah,
I particularly enjoyed your tactical gambit of Fleet Smyrna, but that was me.
Yeah, Fleet Smyrna to Ankh.
I particularly enjoyed that tactical gambit.
It's a lesson for newer players. Like even the players at the top of their game, at the top of the standings, they can make really dumb mistakes and come back from them, right? So
yes,
one of my mantras is tactical misorders are opportunities, and that is very much the case. And this one, if I didn't make it, I probably still win. Maybe more comfortably, but at least this amped up the drama for the viewers. And
I certainly enjoyed that myself. Well, let me give you the last final word about another subject, which is the broadcasters brawl. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. So I'm going to announce this shortly. It'll probably be announced by the time this airs, but we're going to have the second broadcasters brawl on Sunday, March 26th. We've got 7 new players who did not play in the previous one 2 years ago, and they're all going to be playing for charity. Each one has picked out a charity of their choice, and all the charities will get some donation, but the winner's charity will get twice as much as the other. So we'll have the GoFundMe, and people will be able to donate. And last time we raised, I think, $3,300 for charity. So we're going to try to beat that this time. But I'm really excited for all of these players to get a chance to go against each other and give the viewers a chance to critique the critics. So we'll be doing something like we did last time, which is bringing the viewers on screen and giving them a chance to give a little guff back to these guys. So.
Well, I know I'm looking forward to that as well. It was fun to play in the first broadcasters brawl, but having these 7 new DBN personalities play against each other is going to be very exciting.
It'll be a good time. And you'll be Brandon, on air with me, hopefully.
I should be, yes. Brandon, thanks for being on the show, and thanks for everything that you do at DBN as well.
David, I want to thank you so much. You are the Walter Cronkite of DBN, and we would not be the same without you. Thank you for everything that you do.
You just heard Brandon talk about this year's 52nd annual DIPCON, the North American Championship, which will be held in conjunction with the longest-running diplomacy tournament in the world, DixieCon, the last weekend of May in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Being the organizer myself, I can tell you that we already have registrations from 11 different states and provinces, including both familiar names and total newcomers. There's also one guy returning to the event for the first time since he played in DixieCon last in 1996. That's right, he's coming back after 27 years of being gone. There are also other events coming up in the Diplomacy Tour, including San Jose, California, the Whipping Tournament on April 15th and 16th, as well as the Regatta in Denver, Colorado on July 15th and 16th as well. As I reported last month, the 2023 World DIPCON is to be held in Bangkok, Thailand, August 17th through 20th, with another event in Cambodia the following weekend. Registration information for all of these events can be found in the links below. Now, as you also heard Brandon mention, DBN has announced the second Broadcaster Brawl to be played on Sunday, March 26th. It will feature the following rogues gallery of DBN personalities as the players: Ed Sullivan, Karthik Conniff, Kevin O'Kelly, Makarlis Kamarites, Robert Schupa, Tanya Gill, and Zach Moore. Follow the link below to vote on player seating and to enter the lottery to be a guest commentator. You can also donate to the shared pool of money to be distributed to the players' chosen charities, with the winner's charity getting a double share. Help us beat the first Broadcaster Brawl, which raised over $3,000 for a group of fantastic charities. See the links below. Now, let's take a trip around the world of YouTube channels and other diplomacy content creators to report to you on the latest and greatest new diplomacy products from whom we call our DBN Media Partners. Brother Borg recently released a new edition of his podcast series on YouTube called the Diplomacy Dojo. In this latest recording, he discusses mid-game and in-game theory, the different types of players one encounters in hobby play, and what skills gained in diplomacy can be used in other aspects of gaming and life. A link to our Board Brothers' latest product can be found below. Also on YouTube, Florida Man just released the third of his videos about the play of England in diplomacy. This one, which is called First Blood, focuses on overall goals for playing England, including an emphasis on Scandinavia. Check out the previous two videos on English play from Florida Man, and then subscribe to his YouTube channel to get ready for the fourth in the series, to be called Fortress Britain. You can find links to these two products below and also on the media page of the North American Diplomacy Federation website, thenadf.org. Renegade Games has released more details of its upcoming reprint of the Diplomacy board game, including photographs of the box, the map, and the playing pieces. Those wooden pieces are shaped as cannon or ships and are designed to fit neatly into each space on the new crisply colored game board. This set has a pre-order price of $45 and will be shipped to buyers this August in time for simultaneous release at Gen Con in Indianapolis. Included in this version will be tokens to mark province ownership, as well as a completely new edition, a quick start rules page. To check out the photos and pre-order details, visit the link below to the website for Renegade Games. It's time now for a segment we call My Favorite Things, in which we interview a dip hobbyist about their passion or interest, whether or not related to diplomacy. This month, we talked to Michigan player Ben Kellman about all things diplomacy and college football. Hello, Ben Kellman, and welcome back to Deadline.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Tell us a little bit about where you are, what you do, and how you first got involved in diplomacy.
Sure. Well, I am in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm currently finishing up a master's in public policy here at the University of Michigan. Also, I do public policy analysis in healthcare, mostly in the Medicaid space, state level, mostly all over the country.
Awesome. And how did you first get involved in the game?
I was actually taught, it's a kind of a common story, I think. I was taught by a teacher in middle school as sort of a history and diplomacy lesson. And, you know, I played a few games here and there with friends throughout middle school, high school, and college. But, it's funny. I remember the first time we played, we agreed that there wouldn't be deadlines. We would just take as long as we wanted to negotiate. And that didn't work out very well. We didn't get through very much of the game. But, it's hard to pull 7 together. And I kind of dabbled in it for years, playing a little bit of extended deadline, mostly in person when I managed to. But I didn't really get into it until we hit the pandemic. And suddenly, through the virtual community, there were games constantly. I really got to sort of practice enough to feel like I knew what I was doing at that point, and to have it sort of be like a real fun competitive endeavor rather than just sort of an intriguing thing that I knew was out there and I sort of dabbled in.
Well, I think diplomacy is all well and good, but let's talk about what people around the world might call American football for a minute, because there are many diplomacy people who, follow the game. They like to think they understand the game, but unlike those people, you have actually played the game at the collegiate level. So explain that.
Yeah, I did. I played at McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota, at the Division III level. Big fan of football. A lot of strategy involved. I think more than it's given credit for sometimes, and getting to play and have that sort of physical exhilaration going on at the same time as you're competing in something. It's really a great enjoyment for me. I also grew up here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, going to the University of Michigan football games, and that fandom's always been a big part of my a big hobby and enjoyable factor in my life.
Is that a reason why you got into football and stayed in it? Was because of that background at Ann Arbor?
I guess. I mean, we moved here. My family moved here from Philadelphia when I was 6 years old, and one of the ways I really connected with the city and everyone else my age at that time was by reading up on and watching and getting to know the most about the team. I mean, that's a big thing here in Ann Arbor, and they won the well, I guess they won the national championship in 1997, had an undefeated season, so that really got me hooked for life.
Well, if you learn how many timeouts you have and you don't call one when you don't have one, you can win national championships.
That's
Oh,
true.
wait a minute. Well, I'm sorry. I think we're talking
quite had as much success in basketball as we have in football.
Could have had more success if you'd remember how many timeouts you had. But anyway, let's get back to football for a minute. What position did you play?
I started off as guard and then ended up playing fullback in college, and I really enjoyed that. Something really fun about running up to and getting to smack a linebacker when they're there waiting for the ball carrier.
In the offense that you played in up at McAllister, did you get to carry the ball very much, or was it mostly blocking as well?
I didn't. As a bit of a shame, we switched offensive coordinators between my sophomore and junior year, right when I was moving into a starting role, and he had a sort of from a power gap scheme to a zone scheme, if y'all know what that means. And I ended up doing more wingback stuff after that, whereas what I thought I was getting into originally was more of a lead blocker role. But
so you really did want to smack people just like you do on the diplomacy board.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great time. It still was after that. I mean, it's amazing being in a team and getting to compete and getting the physical exhilaration of sport. I always really enjoyed it.
Is there a particular event or game or anything that stands out to you for your college career?
From my football career, I was not necessarily. Our team was relatively average, to be honest. So we never won a championship or anything. It's probably the times that we played against higher rated teams in really big stadiums with tons of fans, and you really feel like there's you're on a big stage. I think that's really the most fun. It's really an enjoyable experience.
Is there a particular opponent that you played that was, higher profile where you remember that experience?
Well, yeah, we played St. Thomas, which is now a Division I AA school, and they had a much bigger stadium, and they were sort of our rivals down the street. They were a much bigger school, and we didn't end up winning the game, but we were in it for a while. And also our coach, who had coached us my first 2 years, had gone over to coach there, so it was really a sort of a grudge match, and that was a fun game.
Grudge matches usually are, honestly.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, football differs significantly from a board game like diplomacy in many ways, but are there any parallels you think between success in that sport or any sport really and success in our game of diplomacy?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly in terms of motivation and in terms of how people enjoy the game, I think there's a lot of different reasons that people play diplomacy. But for me, a big reason is that I miss that competitiveness of sport. I mean, I played football and then I played rugby up until about 5, 6 years ago. My knee doesn't work so well anymore, so I can't really do that. But the competitiveness of going into a defined atmosphere like a game, understanding it and playing to win that game, I think is one of my great pleasures in life. I don't know, people enjoy different things, but I think sort of taking one thing I try to do is take some of the different stressors that come into a game like diplomacy, where you're negotiating and you're by necessity not always being entirely honest with everyone. And put that in the context of a game and imagine that it's more like football. And what you're trying to do is win, right? You're not necessarily trying to, well, you're not necessarily trying to be the most liked all the time, although sometimes you win by being the most liked, right? So you really have to understand the game and try to win the game. I guess that's the similarity.
Well, and there's some similarities that appear, it seems to me, in like goal setting and, carrying out a plan,
Right.
that can carry over into life skills as well.
Absolutely. And it's also important to understand the game you're playing. It's funny, when I first started playing, I went into it with sort of a mindset like football, in terms of being excited and sort of that adrenaline rush you want before a football game, but you don't really want before a diplomacy game. You need to stay very level-headed and flexible in your thinking. It's very much different than trying to ram through something in a diplomacy game.
Yeah, that seems right. Well, I have met you several times now in face-to-face events that since we've resumed doing them after the pandemic shutdown. What about the face-to-face play of diplomacy keeps bringing you back, as opposed to just playing virtually or extended deadline online?
It's great. I mean, the actual ability to see people as you're negotiating with them and get a feel for them. I mean, I've played a lot of virtual face-to-face, and you get some of that, but I think there's an additional level of it in actual face-to-face. And then the other thing is just getting to hang out with people off the board, get a drink, chat, talk about the game, talk about other stuff. I mean, that's a similarity, I guess. Even though in football you're on the same team, and in diplomacy you're sort of competing. Just the camaraderie that comes around playing and getting to know people is really a big part of it.
It's interesting when you say that about the teamwork, because honestly, in diplomacy, you also have to have teamwork and team building skills, even though you are, quote, competing, end quote, with other people on the board. You also, don't you have to learn some ability to be cohesive and work as a team?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's a critical part of the game. And the way I play, I tend to work with people a lot more than I go against them. Although obviously it's not universal. I guess there's something different because when you're on a football team or any sports team, you're always together, right? And you wouldn't ever but in diplomacy, I think a really critical aspect of enjoying being a part of the hobby in a competitive way is to be able to get attacked and then laugh it off after the game.
Yeah, that's true. Another important life skill, though, to not let everything get under your skin so much that you can't function.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, one of the things that you have taken a leadership role in lately has been the organization of virtual house games. So let's talk just a minute about where you're doing that, how you're doing that, and why you think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those games happen on the VWDC server, which everyone should be a part of. Would you put a link in the
Yes.
in the description here? Okay, great.
Yep.
And then I organize those sort of ad hoc. They often happen on weekends, and we rotate the times of them. The idea is just to get everyone a chance to play diplomacy outside of a tournament setting or league setting, which I love to do in a competitive environment, but it can be really fun to get to play outside of that too. It can be especially a great place for newer players to play and sort of cut their teeth getting into a game and getting to see how it works. But it can also be a really good place for experienced players to just play with a little more of a relaxed mindset and have just a fun game, get to try something new. And sort of, I think facilitating that for new players is sort of a contribution to the hobby also. And I think bringing people in is a big part of this. And it can be really fun. It's not exactly what you asked me, but I was playing, just a little pitch for playing with a little less pressure. I was playing in DBNI this past month, and I played my first game, and I'll admit I got a little frazzled, a little affected by the pressure. I subbed into the second game because somebody else dropped out, and I felt no pressure, and it was so fun. I was like, oh man, I wasn't even expecting to play today. And it was such a more enjoyable experience of playing, not to say not to play the competitive leagues, but it can be a really good time playing when there's no stakes, just for fun.
We forget about this sometimes with so much focus on tournament and league play, but most of us started playing diplomacy with a group of friends in a house game setting. Most of us, not all of us, but most of us did.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here. Yeah, I'm here visiting my parents in their basement. We used to play, like I said, when I was able to get 7 people together in high school. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of enjoyment in the game that way. It doesn't. I love that we have the competitive structures that we have, but it has to be. It doesn't have to be for something to be an enjoyable game.
That's totally right. Well, without an external set of outcomes like a tournament rule setting or scoring or whatever, how do house games typically end in your experience, and when?
That's an interesting question. Well, we set
Well, I
time.
asked-
Yeah, right. We tend to set time limits, just to be safe. Although sometimes, I'll go into a game and there'll be 7 players, and I'll say, okay, so when who has to go? When do you want to set a time limit? And they'll go, oh, we don't need to be there anywhere, anytime. So I think it does vary a great deal. Excuse me. I think it does vary a great deal depending on who's playing and what motivations they're playing for. We've had people refuse draws because they decided on a center amount that they want to get to. We've had really dominant, oftentimes, I guess, you have a really dominant position, and then people don't feel like playing long enough to go all the way against and challenge it. But we've had all different kinds of structures and finishes, the way most diplomacy games do.
Oh, that's good. Well, if somebody wanted to contact you about playing in a house game, or wanting to get you to organize a house game, whether they're a newer player or an experienced player, how would they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, if anybody has a group of people and they want a game, we are always happy to help fill that. I'm always happy to help fill that game out. If you have 3 or 4 people and you want me to recruit, another 3 people or something, or if you're just interested in playing on a particular weekend. I mean, my name is Ben Kellman on Discord. It's not anything different, so you should be able to find me. Also, if you post in VWDC or NADF or anywhere, I'll see it. I'm on those. And yeah, just always happy to organize things, to answer any questions, to welcome in newer players, or facilitate things for experienced players. So,
Well, Ben, I appreciate that. I know the hobby appreciates you serving in that role, and thanks again for being on Deadline.
thanks, David.
And now for our feature presentation, let's debut a new segment we call the Once and Future Hobby, where we talk to hobbyists from diplomacy's past and present about our hobby's past, present, and future. Starting us off, let's welcome to Deadline longtime zine publisher Chris Hassler of California, whose zine called SOB has been running longer than some of y'all have been alive. Well, Chris, welcome to Deadline.
Thank you.
Could you give us a brief bio on who Chris Hassler is? Where do you live? What do you do? How did you get into games?
I live in Southern California. Always been interested in board games. I've loved them since I was a small child. And what got me into publishing was an advertisement in the General magazine, an old magazine that was published by the Avalon Hill Game Company way back when. And it introduced me to a group of face-to-face players. Within that group, kind of the leader of that group was a guy named Kevin Kinsel, who published a zine called The Dogs of War. And the word dogs was actually an acronym. It stood for Diplomats of the Great Stab. I got interested in publishing at that point and started with a game called Machiavelli, which is kind of a variant of diplomacy set in Renaissance Italy.
Yeah, that's actually what I would consider to be a commercially published variant of diplomacy. Although there's only several, there's only a handful of those. Machiavelli being one of them.
Yeah, it was published by the Avalon Hill Game Company. At least it got taken over by them in 1980. I can't remember who published it before then, and then was republished with updated rules in '95.
Tell us a little bit about how Machiavelli works.
It's very similar to diplomacy. The main differences are that there are 3 turns per year instead of only 2, spring, summer, and fall. And that, especially when you play with the advanced rules, there's an economic aspect to it. The territory you occupy gives you ducats, and you can spend those ducats to build and maintain units. You can also spend those ducats to bribe opponents' units. One aspect of armies during that time is that they were mostly mercenaries. And given that, they were prone to bribery. So you can spend ducats to disband an opponent's army or to make it your own, which adds some interesting flavor, I think, to the game.
It really does. It's what variant enthusiasts would call both a rules variant and a map variant, changing the map of diplomacy and adding to the rules.
Yes, exactly.
Are you still running Machiavelli now, 2023? After
I am. I've got one game currently operating. Used to have as many as 3 at a time going, but the interest in that has waned a bit. You can run Machiavelli with as many as 7 players, just like diplomacy, although there are some variants that can give you 8. But currently, the current game I've got only has 5 players in it.
Well, let's talk about your zine just a minute. What's the name of it? And you said you started it because the Dogs of War was going. Tell us how that worked.
Yeah, the name is called SOB, and it started out as a subzine within Dogs of War. I did that for a couple of years, running pretty much exclusively Machiavelli, and then broke out on my own in '93. The name, or the acronym SOB, is exactly what you think it is, and it is an homage, I guess, to the Dogs of War. It is the son of the Dogs of War. So that's how I came up with that.
Well, I have been subscribing or playing in SOB for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit of how the zine has changed over time.
It's changed considerably. It was originally a completely paper zine. I was one of the first zines to provide color maps, and that was sometime in the mid 90s, I think 95, 96. And then I started to create a website for the zine as well. And that was mainly because at the time, my provider allowed free hosting services. So I took advantage of that and had the website for all the games. It allowed me to create or to do corrections whenever that was necessary, and to basically keep people more up to date with things. And as time went on, more and more people started submitting the orders via email rather than postal, or sometimes even by phone. And so sometime in the I think it was like the mid-aughts, I started running games that really weren't suitable for the traditional zine format, and that required a lot more interaction. So I started running some of those continuously via email. I think probably the most popular game currently I'm running in that way is Terraforming Mars.
Right.
It's actually one of my favorite games too. It's
oh yeah, well, certainly one of mine. And I was trying to think back, Chris. That's one of the games I have played in your zine, along with Outpost, Age of Renaissance, New World. I'm currently playing a game of Titan.
Yep.
In your zine. Give us an idea of what kind of games you have run or currently running or have run in the past.
I like the Eurogame style of games. So things like the worker placement style, like Agricola or Lords of Waterdeep. I've run both of those, as well as games like Terra Mystica and Gaia Project, which is the science fiction version of Terra Mystica. Other games, Suburbia is a really good game that I've run a number of times. There's a Discworld Ankh-Morport game, it's card-based game that I've run. Now, a lot of these, sometimes they're the same players that run it, that play it each time, but that's fine. As long as they're enjoying it and I'm enjoying it, there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, you know, as much as you don't run diplomacy in your zine, you're obviously running a diplomacy variant. Your zine is very much diplomacy adjacent, in the sense that a lot of the guys that I've played with over the years, diplomacy, are still playing it. Now, Andrew York jumps out at me. He's an old-time diplomacy player.
Yeah, he's one of my charter subscribers, and he's still very active. He's one of the ones that regularly plays Discworld, Ankh-Morpork, and Suburbia. He's been rather busy lately, so he hasn't been in as many games of late, but I'm sure he'll pick that up. And he's also one of the few people I've met in person. I've met him a couple of times. He's been to Southern California, and one time he actually took my sons and I to an Angels game because he's a big baseball fan.
And I think, does he still live in Texas?
Yes, he does.
Yeah. Well, your zine is what we used to call in the old days a warehouse zine, in the sense that it's mostly just games. Although you do give us a little update on how your family's doing every time.
Yeah, I do. And in the past, I've done some other things. I used to have a regular column about science because I majored in astronomy in college, although I ended up in computer science or in the information technology field. And I tried a couple of different times to get a letter column going, but never really got the participation that could keep it going. So just fell back on just the games, which is sufficient, I think.
Yeah, give us a little commercial for people that haven't played in a zine format. They may have played computer games online with various random people or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to Terraforming Mars and play online with people you don't necessarily know, or maybe people you do know. Give us an idea of why people play in zines and why people should continue to play in zines.
It's more the social interaction. A lot of times, the people, think, for example, Terraforming Mars, you encounter a lot of the same people. Now, I've got a fairly wide selection of people who play Terraforming Mars, probably about 8 or 9 different people. So in each particular game, you're not necessarily going against all the same people, but you have some familiarity with the people. And so there's that social aspect. You can email each other and make deals and things like that if you're so inclined. And there are others games where deals are part of the whole process. So you have people that you kind of know, that you've encountered before. I can kind of trust that guy, or those sorts of things.
Well, diplomacy people aren't going to know what you're talking about with any of this deal making discussion.
This is true. Yeah, that's
no idea. What keeps you going after all? I mean, you had literally been doing this for 30 years. What keeps you going?
I enjoy it. That's what it comes down to. As long as I keep enjoying it, I'm going to keep doing it. And as long as there are people out there who are willing to support it, then yeah.
Well, I know you've seen a lot of changes in the games hobby, sort of the diplomacy adjacent hobby over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an argument for keeping zines alive in an age where the zines are no longer the backbone of the gaming hobby?
I think there is. You get a sense of where people are at. Like, I do enjoy, for example, Tom Howell's zine. He has a pretty extensive column in there about what's going on with him, much more detail than I usually get up to, which I think is interesting. I played Dominion in his zine several times now. Brendan White, who's out of Australia, is another one who he's usually has a pretty extensive travelogue in his. He and his wife go all over the place in Australia.
Yeah, and I think he used to live in New Zealand too, which is why at one time we actually honored. He doesn't know this probably, but we honored him last weekend by naming one of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network Invitational games after him. And I gave a little spiel about him, because he's such an important figure in the Australia-New Zealand hobby in diplomacy. And his zine is still going now, and it's still paper.
It's still entirely paper, yeah. I'm playing the game of Robo Rally in that zine. So.
Now, if someone wanted to sign up, Chris, to play and play games in your zine, how would one do that?
Just go to my website, sob-zine.org.
And there's instructions there on how to do it.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Chris, I wanted to thank you for being here to walk us a little down memory lane here for people who are not familiar with as much with as what I call the zine scene, which used to be the whole hobby was basically the zine scene.
Oh, yeah.
Now it's, of course, not really that anymore, but I appreciate the reminiscing.
Yeah, I do too. I've enjoyed it.
And Chris, keep going. There's another 30 years possibly in your future here.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for being on Deadline.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this broadcast of Deadline. If you have news, ideas for features, or feedback of any kind, please feel free to send an email to info@diplobn.com, or you can drop me a line directly using davidhood@dixiecon.com. To review all of our broadcast offerings, visit the website www.diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss and, of course, Belgium.